Proper inspection and checking of the landing gear system is the most critical element of successful operation of the system. In order to properly inspect the gear, you'll need the following items: aircraft jacks and hydraulic mule, tools for disconnecting the landing gear doors as needed, measuring devices including feeler gauges, steel rules, and if rigging holes are installed on the actuator bell cranks, rigging pins. We'll begin with a detailed visual inspection of the gear, followed by measurement and test of the gear rigging. Between the two, the visual inspection is the most important. As an aircraft mechanic, your skills and power of observation are crucial to detecting unsafe or abnormal conditions in the gear system. The procedure shown in this program is sequential. In reality, a crew of competent and trained mechanics could perform many of these tests and checks simultaneously. Begin by jacking the aircraft. As each gear clears the ground, listen for any unusual sounds or movement of the strut and wheels. With the aircraft on jacks, begin a thorough visual inspection of the gear. Carefully check and note any deflection or looseness in the gear and attaching mechanisms. Open the main gear doors and then secure them with tape so they will not swing into the path of the gear during operation. Remove the hardware securing the nose gear doors and tape them into the open position, observing the same cautions as the mains. Note the condition of the hardware securing the nose gear doors. Replace worn bolts, bushings, and nuts as may be needed. Do not substitute part numbers, especially hardware. Visually inspect the interior of each wheel well. Look for evidence of any part of the gear chafing or rubbing against the aircraft structure or other parts of the gear mechanism. Inspect each strut for visible damage, especially in the wheel and tire area, and at the attachments for the drag brace. Check that all wiring in the wheel well is properly secured and out of the way of the gear mechanism. Pay particular attention to wiring that flexes, such as that attached to the landing gear door torque tubes. Retract the gear and observe its movement into the well, paying particular attention for any abnormal sounds or noises. Vary the pressure provided by the mule as need be to be able to control the speed of gear retraction, and observe the gear more closely at different points in the retraction cycle. Repeat this procedure for all three gears. With the gear in the wells, perform another visual inspection. Check those areas that were not readily visible with the gear extended. Now that the drag braces have folded, check for proper routing of wiring in the wheel well and clearances to other structure and mechanical members. Extend the gear using the emergency means by rotating the emergency release in the cockpit aft. Listen and observe as the gear extends, noting any abnormalities. Move the handle back to the normal position. The gear should retract. Now extend the gear normally. Cycle the gear 3 more times and leave in the down position. We will now begin the actual measurement and test to determine that the gear is functioning properly. Extreme caution should be practiced while working on or around the gear, especially while personnel are in the wheel wells and the aircraft has hydraulic and electrical power applied. We'll begin with the main gear. Make sure the gear handle is in the down position and hydraulic pressure applied. We'll be checking to see that the actuator bell cranks are properly positioned to lock the drag brace and strut in the down position. During landing gear extension, remember that on the mains, the inboard actuator on each side is connected to the emergency hand pump, while the outboard actuator is connected to the main hydraulic system. Have someone move the hand pump selector valve forward and pump the hand pump, while observers watch the inboard bell crank. During normal extension, the bell crank must move to the full lock position via the power of the bell crank spring, not the hand pump. If the bell crank is stopping short, indicated by its further movement when the hand pump is actuated, it will likely lead to false gear unsafe indications later on. Now check the position of both bell cranks. Measure the location of the bell crank according to maintenance manual instructions. If the bell crank is improperly positioned, it may be adjusted by using the actuator length adjustment. However, before making such an adjustment, consider the situation carefully. Because of the design of this system, the only reasons this adjustment should be required are that either the gear was improperly rigged in the first place, or something has changed due to component wear or failure. If a previously correctly rigged gear suddenly requires adjustment, further inspection of the gear installation should be accomplished. Also check for the clearance between the drag brace cam and the bell crank roller by pushing up at the hinged point of the drag brace. Measure the clearance in accordance with maintenance manual instructions. Again, remember our previous caution about a gear suddenly needing to be adjusted. If the clearance being measured has changed significantly, then almost certainly something else in the gear has changed as well. Next, retract the gear. Observe the actuator bell crank and stop the gear at a point where the drag brace cam tip is closest to the bell crank roller. A support may be placed under the gear to hold it in the required position. Measure the clearance between the roller and the cam tip according to the maintenance manual. After completion of this measurement, allow the gear to continue to the fully up and locked position. Check the engagement of the up-lock hook and the up-lock roller as per the maintenance manual. The speed and force with which the gear enters the well often affects the performance of the up-lock system. Since many hydraulic power carts do not duplicate the flow of the onboard hydraulic system, the gear may move very slowly. Retracting the gear in this fashion may produce two problems. First, the gear may fail to indicate up and locked when in fact it is. Secondly, a weak cart may not show that the up-lock hooks are rigged too tight and can actually allow the up-lock roller to bounce out of them, or worse yet, damage the up-lock components. If this condition is not caught during the visual inspection, a weak hydraulic cart can mask over the situation by just barely putting the gear on the hook. In flight, however, the gear may cycle from locked to unlocked and back to locked again during retraction. The problem is not that the power cart runs out of pressure, but that it simply cannot provide the needed amount of hydraulic fluid flow. To reduce the flow requirements, have one person hold the left main gear back during the retraction process until the other gear are substantially retracted. Now release this gear. Even though the gears will not move to the up and locked position simultaneously, the hydraulic flow available to each gear will be greater. Extend the landing gear, and we will now perform the same checks on the nose gear. We'll begin with the nose gear actuator bell cranks. Remember that the nose gear pilot side actuator is connected to the normal down hydraulic system, while the co-pilot side actuator is connected to the emergency down system. After the gear has been extended normally, hand pump the emergency system and watch for movement of the actuator bell crank. Again, movement of this bell crank means that it is not moving to the full down and lock position under the power of the bell crank spring, and will likely produce unsafe gear indications at some later point. Also note that the striker arms, which are linked to the up-lock hook, are in contact with the bell crank rollers. Check the location of the bell cranks per the maintenance manual instructions. Remember our previous caution from the main gear test. If the position of these cams is found to be sufficiently incorrect so as to require adjustment, they were either rigged wrong in the first place or something has changed. Next, retract the gear. Inspect the up-lock hook and up-lock roller per the maintenance manual. If adjustments are required, remember that the striker arms must remain in contact with the bell crank roller. When the nose gear is fully retracted, the actuator bell cranks will be against hard stops. In some cases, these stops have had shims added. The purpose of these shims is to raise or lower the final position of the strut in the retracted position. They perform no other functions. These shims, if required, are installed at the factory. Unless a major component, such as the strut or drag brace, has been replaced, or the aircraft is being repaired after major damage, the number of shims installed should never need to be changed. Now we'll check the rigging of the landing gear doors. Reconnect the nose gear door linkage and retract the gear. Check that the doors are smoothly faired, that the doors do not overlap each other at any point, and that the forward edge of the doors is at least the minimum distance aft of the nose skin. Cycle the gear several times, observing the fit of the doors on each operation. With the gear extended, push the door actuator torque tube hook up until the doors touch the strut. Now release the hook. The door should swing fully open very quickly. The mechanism should travel fully over center, so the doors cannot be pushed closed without lifting the hook. Now we'll check the main gear door rigging. Partially retract the gear and verify that the proper clearance is maintained between the lower lip of the gear door actuator hook and the gear door roller. If the clearance is not being maintained, it may be adjusted through means of the door linkage stop bolt installed on the keelson. A special caution is warranted about this adjustment. First, adjusting these stops can lead to severe problems if done improperly. Secondly, unless the landing gear door actuator torque tube has been replaced, there should not ever be any reason for them to require adjustment. If you are absolutely certain that they need adjustment, and you are absolutely certain that no other problems exist with the gear, then adjust the stops following the maintenance manual procedure. While the gear is partially retracted, relatch the doors to the linkage. Now perform the same test as was done to the nose gear. Push the door hook upwards until the doors close partially, then release the hook. The door should snap open sharply and the mechanism move fully over center. The doors should not be capable of being pushed closed without lifting the actuator hook. Repeat this test several times and correct any evidence of dragginess or hang-up. Also check the condition of the safety wire securing the breakaway portion of the door actuator hook. With the gear in this position, check the gap between the door hinge and the bulb seal restraining strap. This is an important minimum clearance. Again, the door linkage may be adjusted to obtain this clearance, but should not be required unless something has changed on the gear. Now retract the gear all the way. Check the fit of the doors and ensure that all maintenance manual clearances are met. Unlatch the doors and secure them open. Extend the gear and observe that as the gear completes its extension, the roller on the drag brace engages the aft door actuator hook. With the gear fully extended, reconnect the doors. Cycle the gear at least twice more, checking door fit and operation. With all doors connected, we will now check the emergency extension system. First, we'll check the hydraulic portion of the system. Stop the hydraulic cart and cycle the flap handle to bleed system pressure to 0. Move the gear selector valve in the emergency position and use the hand pump to build 1000 psi indicated on the gauge. Time the pressure bleed down rate. If it is not within the acceptable limits, a leak exists in the system which must be corrected. Return the selector valve to the normal position and retract the gear. With hydraulic pressure from the cart applied, slowly begin rotating the emergency release handle aft. The gear should release and the pack shut off by the time the handle has been rotated approximately 45 degrees. The sound of the hydraulic system will change when the pack shuts off. The gear should exit the well simultaneously and be capable of being easily pushed into the full down position. If the gear extension does not occur until the handle has been rotated further aft, adjustment of the emergency release cable system may be necessary. The gear should be retracted and extended several times to ensure that the release occurs properly. Use the hand pump and the selector valve to pump the gear to a full down indication. At the completion of the emergency extension test, cycle the gear 3 additional times to remove air that may have been introduced into the system. At completion, perform one last visual inspection of the gear and then remove the aircraft from jacks.